Hello everyone, my name is Karina. I am a costume technician, researcher, and artisan who goes by Kartsie on social media. And welcome back to my Scooby-Doo 6's AU series for Daphne Blake Part 5, where we finally make her signature dress. In this series, I've been bringing to life over the past 3 years the mystery gang from Scooby-Doo, with the help of my best friends. The target year is 1969 when the show first aired, and so far we have brought to life Velma Dinkley, a gender bend of Shaggy Rogers, Fred Jones, and today, Daphne Blake. In the last video turned documentary, we tackled the mystery of who is Daphne Blake, exploring her evolution over the decades and highlighting cultural movements and events in the franchise that made her who she is today. But this is the video you all have been waiting for, where we not only dissect Daphne's original dress, looking at fashion trends from the 1960s, but also solve the mystery behind her iconic purple, the fabric of the dress, and the overall fit of the garment. All leading up to the Daphne Blake cosplay reveal at the end of this video, where I will not only show off her main look, but also the capsule wardrobe I built and vintage sourced. And keep a lookout for a mysterious announcement video all about what comes next in the Scooby-Doo cosplay series. Designing Daphne. Compared to the other characters in the gang, Daphne was the most involved to create. In fact, I ended up making 3 different versions of the dress, learning a new detail I wanted to solve with each iteration. But to really explain the design process, let's first break down the major characteristics of the dress that I need to thoroughly consider and edit. Firstly, the dress is 2 shades of purple, a darker hue and a lighter hue, that is not only found on the dress, but also the matching headband and shoes. These are unique colors that will have to be dyed because it would be impossible to find and buy them. Secondly, Daphne is designed with a scarf to make the separate animation of the head and body easier, but this scarf hides what the neckline or collar looks like underneath. So I will have to take artistic license with the neckline. Third, there are long sleeves with cuffs that match up with the top strut of the dress, around hip bone level. This line will be important to keep in mind while patterning. Fourth, the skirt of the dress flares out a little bit for movement, but not by a lot, with a hemline that hits around mid-thigh. And most tricky of all, fifth, there is a dramatic emphasis on her waistline, creating a figure-hugging appearance in the animation that is contrasted with the dress being a drop waist. To understand how to best interpret her character design, I needed to go back and look at real-life examples that the animation was interpreting and stylizing from the late 1960s that ended up giving us Daphne Blake. So let's take a historical tangent. Evolving off the 1950s, which emphasized the waist and bust with either full or pencil skirts, the early 1960s kept a similar fitted feeling to the previous decade, with these years especially latching on to the narrower skirt styles. But when something is in style for a while, as seen throughout fashion history, there is the need for something new, or a re-emergence of an opposite style from a previous trend cycle. An example in our current 20s decade is the switch from skinny jeans of the 2010s to the return of the straight cut and cargo style pants from the 90s and 2000s. For the swinging 60s, this was a reaction away from fitted and tailored styles of the 1940s and 50s to a fashion mirroring of the relaxed and boxy waistlines of the roaring 20s. Much like the 1920s, the 1960s developed its own fashion for the new generation, with higher hemlines that were radical for their times. They both rejected the curvy body ideals of the decades preceding them for boyish figures, drop waists, hair bobs, colorful hosiery, and slinking silhouettes, with 1960s designers often referencing the 20s in their modern work. But where the two diverge is how exactly the 1960s took these styles and gave them their own twist. Contrary to the at times delicate fabric of the 1920s, which emphasized breathable and sheer lightweight layering of natural materials such as cotton, silk, linen, or rayon, the 1960s was right at the height of the boom of synthetic materials that boasted thick, non-wrinkling fabrics with color fastness. These new materials, which featured nylon, polyester, acrylic, and/or spandex, were often heavyweight materials with a structured fall. They were used to mass-produce quite possibly one of the most iconic silhouettes from the period, the A-line, as their double-knit or fused stiff qualities supported the A-line shape on its own from the body, instead of creating a drapey vertical fall. But if we look at these dresses and compare them to Daphne, we notice that they don't have the same waist emphasis that we are looking for. So let's shift gears to a lesser discussed 1960s dress trend, the drop waist. Drop waist styles are exactly what they sound like. The dropping of the waistline from the natural position under the ribcage to a lower placement on the body. In this case, the placement we are looking for is around the hip bone. This placement on Daphne is not only a waistline, but also a graphic stripe line that is in fashion in a variety of ways, from thick knitted stripes on dresses, thin woven inserts, belt placements, and even top-applied ribbons or ruffles. This seemingly magical line on the body was not only used for the placement of stripes, but also as a good proportional line for the placement of pockets, and as an endpoint for blouses, tanks, and sweater hemlines. For the dresses that most resemble what we are making today, there's a variety of skirt options. Knife pleats, box pleats, half circles, quarter circles, and gathered skirts. The closest design-wise image I found to Daphne's dress is this floral motif drop waist with thin stripes along all the edges of the dress. It has slightly more kick than what I'm looking for in the skirt, but presented me with a lovely example of the look of the fit on the torso. If you notice, all these drop waist examples, they are not super fitted to the body. They have a level of ease to them, with delicate curved side seams that emphasize the waist without being skin tight. This is the fit I set out to accomplish with my interpretation of the Daphne dress. A nice design with no distracting front darts, only side bust darts, to help shape the dress on top of a conical vintage bullet bra that I purchased for this cosplay. But one spot that will need more darts for shaping is the back. As seen on many dresses from this decade and into the 1970s, to help add shape to these seemingly boxy or triangular feeling silhouettes, fisheye darts would be used for the back panels. The darts in the back add just enough shape to the loose fit to give a slight emphasis on the waistline. This loose fit is partially why the decade is called the swinging 60s. Trendy dresses twisted and slinked on the body as women walked or danced, emphasizing movement and creating a garment that was easy to slip on and off. Most modern interpretations of Daphne, because of our 21st century beauty ideals about the snatched waist, interpret the dress as a bodycon and even extend this idea into the skirt, making it very narrow and figure-hugging. But my mission is to interpret and strike a balance between vintage reality and the cartoon. So this distinct fit in the period was what I struggled with most to pattern. But I soon discovered the reason why I was struggling was not because of my patterning process, but because of my material choices. The hunt for the perfect fabric. There are 3 different dress iterations I went through, with 3 entirely different material choices. My mistake with the first Daphne dress was picking fabric too quickly because it was purple. But as we will discuss in the next section, the shade of the purple wasn't right, so I decided to start again. But looking back now, not only did the initial Princess Seam look not have the spirit of Daphne's dress, but the material I chose then was way too thick for the style. This second version was made with white cotton lycra that I chose because it was dyeable and had a level of stretch for a waist-hugging look. Although this dress had a good skirt shape and overall appearance, the more I stared and compared it to the rest of my adaptations of the characters in the series, the more I realized it looked like a modern cosplay instead of the vintage interpretations I was aiming for. So, with a heavy and frustrated heart, I started the Daphne dress all over again. This time, allowing myself breathing space from the main project to explore the 1960s and 70s creatively by recreating pieces for my own wardrobe, like this Andre Courreges dress and the heart coat. This exploration became the Daphne wardrobe project, which extended into vintage shopping, as in my free time to decompress and study outside school, I would peruse and sometimes buy interesting pieces from antique shops and vintage boutiques to expand my knowledge on the previous decades in my Daphne wardrobe. But what I didn't expect the more time I spent in these stores was for my touch to strengthen as well. I began to be able to distinguish the precise textures, weights, and looks of the synthetic textiles that came from the 60s and 70s, to the point that I can now identify through touch alongside style the garment's era. This new education into the scratchy, thick, and wild prints of the period made me very curious if I could find vintage fabric online for the Daphne dress, as modern textiles don't quite have the same feel as vintage ones. And it was through buying this gorgeous vintage fabric for yet another Daphne wardrobe look that I found my answer. On the back of this wool material, there is a synthetic fusible that helps add the stiffness that many garments in this era had for structure. After digging more online, I managed to find 3 yards of this vintage white crepe, or off-white crepe, which was backed with a tricot, the same fusible as the plaid material I had bought before, adding to this drapey crepe just enough weight and slinkiness to really give the Daphne dress what I was looking for. A purple mystery. As purple is my favorite color, I was very interested in figuring out Daphne's shades. But as I stared at the original cartoon, I realized that Daphne's colors change drastically, depending on the moment you pause the show. This was a similar issue I had when sourcing the right shade of pink for her pantyhose, which I talked about in detail in the Pantyhose Revolution video. My conclusion, based on conversations I had with family members who lived through the 60s and 70s, and from research, was that Daphne's nylons were sheer pink, as can be seen in her daylight shots, and that the animation was inconsistent because in real life, fashionable colored pantyhose tinted your skin tone and didn't overpower them, something difficult to show in flat colored animation. In the daytime shots for Daphne, they lighten the pink to show a skin tone, and for nighttime shots, they brighten the pink to add contrast and extra cartoon flair. But the final piece in the puzzle I discovered took me a year to not figure out, but to literally see, with my own eyeballs. I had never been able to distinguish till that moment, staring at the first iteration of the Daphne dress, the difference between warm and cool toned purples. It's like I was seeing the world in a whole new way afterwards, and I don't quite understand mentally why I couldn't see the difference, but I have an idea, at least slightly scientifically. What I do know is that according to science, purple is a color our brains create, and technically isn't on the light spectrum. So it's quite possible that we all see purple slightly differently, but we just have no way to articulate this difference to each other. After seeing this difference between warm and cool, I realized that the first Daphne dress was too warm, or had too much red in it, and that the reason I can't find a Daphne purple in fabric form was because her specific shade is a cool purple, meaning it has more blue in it than red. A type of purple that just isn't popular right now. So for the second iteration, I went looking for fabric with natural materials like cotton so that I could dye the purple. I was able to create 2 different purples using the Rit Dye website that I was happy with. But as I discussed before, I didn't quite like my tight material choice. To go about dyeing the third dress iteration, I first made samples of colors to see how they reacted to this fabric. I dyed the fabric already cut out with the edges serged to allow for an even dye look and set my pot to boil. For the light purple, hyacinth dye was used only in small quantities and with a fast timer of 15 seconds to allow for a lighter color. The dark purple was accomplished with 2 minutes of purple dye and a 15 seconds dip in royal blue Rit dye. The fabrics were then rinsed of their excess dye water, stretched and patted flat on a towel to stop distortion, and then set on a drying rack, occasionally thrown into the dryer. All the purples. Making the final dress. The Daphne dress pattern was adapted off a base pattern I have of my upper body. The drafting method for this pattern was made with this book on screen and features a back shoulder dart, a design detail that accommodates the shoulder blades seen on many vintage dresses. The fitting process for Daphne evolved as my understanding of how best to pattern the back and skirt portions changed. My first 2 drafts had no back fisheye darts and relied too much on the back and side seams being dramatically curved. This resulted in drag lines across the back because the fabric was being overfitted. But my problem, if I want to add a fisheye dart in the back to help with the shaping and the tension line that's happening diagonally here, is I need to make this less of an extreme curve. See how gentle this curve is? I need to do something very similar here, which means I'm going to have to reshape this so that it has a way more gentler swoosh, and then the excess volume will just get taken in the dart. I also patterned the dress with enough space for my arms to have complete range of motion, resulting in the finished design having a little bit of slack in the upper back. Now, when it came to the collar, I at first played around with the idea of an inset neckline of a lighter material, but this would have shown with the scarf on. So I landed on a thin band collar extension instead of a neckline, which in pattern form is a simple rectangle the length of the neckline with a little bit of extra for the overlap of the closure. This neckline will be light purple, as all the other areas of the dress have this color as their bottom edges. The skirt was slashed evenly in front, sides, and back to equally distribute the splay of fabric, added to give extra kick. In the end, with my final mock-up, I achieved the best proportions of the dress for my figure. Now, I almost didn't have enough material when I went to cut, and had to strategize how best to lay everything out, as I only had 3 yards of 45 inches wide material. With some strategizing, I managed to fit all the pieces. After all the pieces were sewn together, matching up the notches so as not to distort the pattern fit, I worked on hand finishing the hem facings and cuffs, as well as matching the striped side seams of the skirt. In classic vintage dress fashion, I gave the dress a lap zipper, fixed stretch distortions that occurred when the side seam bias of the crepe skirt hung for a while and gave the whole thing a good press. Isn't she pretty? I think this is one of the most well-developed dress patterns I have to date. The art of scarf tying. Much like the pantyhose, I had a fierce debate with myself whether or not the scarf was like opaque or sheer. At first, I bought this silk charmeuse fabric, but during the week at the photo shoot, I realized I had been tying the scarf wrong, and the true styling required a large square, not a rectangle. So I ditched the charmeuse and instead used a vintage green nylon scarf with butterflies in it that I had thrifted as an option. I am very proud of myself for figuring out the Daphne scarf tying method, which I am demonstrating on screen now. Overall, it just gives it a more natural styled appearance instead of this weird forced style I was doing before. Shoe clips in a square toe. I was both nervous and excited about Daphne's shoes because I would have to paint them, and I had never done that before. I'd never painted shoes before. But before I could really paint them, I needed to find the perfect shoe base. If you look at the animation, Daphne's shoes featured a low heel and square toe, which was a footwear style popular at the time. I managed to find a pair online for cheap, but stayed away from pleather. Instead, I purchased a fox suede so that I could paint it with acrylic paint. The benefit of this is that the suede texture soaks in the acrylic paint and doesn't show cracks in the paint as much. So I decided to make Daphne's butterfly-like detail on her shoe a shoe clip, something that turned out to be great for practically storing the shoes later. The final details: hair, makeup, and headband. As always, when it comes to hair and makeup on this channel, I collaborate with my lovely mother. I'm responsible for gathering historical research and references, as well as finding and purchasing wigs and makeup products, while she creates an application process with me and handles touch-ups and maintenance of both the hair and makeup during the photo shoots. For Daphne, we went for a simple eye makeup with a pale pink eyeshadow and simple black liner. The lips had soft pink lip gloss, and the cheeks a slight pink blush placed on the areas of the face that we could see in photos from the period. We also curled and put tons of mascara on my eyelashes, as big doll-like eyes were popular in this period. Side note, I did not paint my eyebrows for this look, but I would like to note that they are technically accurate as is, because Daphne is drawn with black brows in the animation. This is the second Daphne wig I purchased for this project. The first Daphne wig shade of red didn't look good on my skin tone, so I went looking for a different color. I wanted to strike a balance between what looked good on me and looked the most realistic. This was the wig I landed on, and we styled it with chunky heated hair curlers that would be left to sit overnight. After the wig is set, they are removed and the hair is brushed together and up, forming a curled up effect. I then simply took a leftover dyed crepe scrap I had saved, removed the fusible to make it less bulky, and sewed it onto the headband as the finishing touch. So without further ado, here is my finished Daphne Blake. Jeepers. This has been a journey to create. An adventure involving dyeing, fabric sourcing, research, photography, photo editing, and patience. Constantly fighting my pursuit for perfection with burnout and fatigue, on top of everything else that was going on in my life. I've held in my mind this grand reveal of a wardrobe for years now, and I am so happy that it's finally complete after all this time. If you would like to see the complete magazine, for the month of January 2025 you can via my link tree in the description. And while you're there, make sure to follow my Instagram for upcoming posts all about the research and details behind each look. Big thanks to my mother for putting up with all my wild ideas and being our photographer in these sessions. We used leftover brick paneling from a theater play and painted it all pink for a few of the photos because it was very difficult to find the colors of Daphne in a vintage location or colored textures around my city. The one place we did find that ended up being our background for the main look was a stunning mural by Judgmo. It was just the right blend between cute and bold for the Daphne cosplay. I would also like to say welcome to all the new people who have joined us in this Scooby-Doo cosplay adventure since the Daphne documentary. And thank you to all the ones who have been here since the beginning. I work hard on these videos, spending hours on them, and the fact that others are joining in on the ride makes me very touched and excited to share what comes next, as over the years I have increasingly dreamed up new ideas that I want to accomplish with this series. So before the grand reveal of the full gang together, we have one more character to create. And no, it's not Scooby-Doo, it's someone a lot scarier. So keep a lookout for this spooky announcement video, and comment below which monstrous character you think it is. See you guys next time.